Hello everyone. I'm about to start a speaker cosmetic restoration process. I've done this before with some larger klipsch KLF speakers, and it turned out real nice. And essentially I kind of wished that I had documented the process a little bit for other folks, because of course when I was wondering how to go about speaker restoration, I went directly to YouTube and I was looking for resources. And these are some KLH Model 24s. They were a gift from a family member. They're actually in pretty good shape, although there's one moment that really bothers me, which is the primary reason why I'm going to give these guys a total re-veneer. The wood kind of flaked off here in the bottom left hand corner of one of these speakers, and so I need to repair that. I think I just maybe enjoy working on things, so it was really an excuse or reason to take on this project. Before I even started with this, and I used to use these for cinema surround sounds. Actually, they work pretty well in my opinion. So before I did all this work, I wanted to make sure that that they sounded good, and so I hadn't used them in a while. They had been sitting in my garage, so I plugged them into my stereo, turned up the volume a little bit, and I did notice, I don't remember seeing these little kind of holes previously on the caps. I almost kind of feel like that's new. Thank God I do have a really great, reliable speaker guy. I'm actually here in New Mexico, but my speaker guy is in Colorado. I go up there quite often. If I need speakers being rebuilt as far as capacitors or the cones or this sort of detailed work, I rely on the folks with that kind of expertise to help me in that realm. And so if I can get these looking really great cosmetically, I think it'd be worth it, but I'm also a little bit biased. Again, I just love all these old speakers, and it's a shame to let them just disappear or rot away. They do have some normal wear and tear from just years of use. In fact, this one has a little bit of evidence of some water damage. I wonder if someone put a plant up there. But it's not going to be a whole lot of work or process to just get these corners really nice and tight with some Bondo before I go to the next step. Try to focus in on that a little bit before I go to the next step of applying the veneer. And so yeah, I'm just kind of giving you guys an overview of the condition of these speakers and what I plan to do. And they're KLH Model 24s. They're not even really expensive speakers, but to me they're the perfect size for a surround cinema environment, especially if I can just get them looking a little better. Some of the I've done this before. I mentioned that before on a pair of Pioneer HPM 60s. Turned out absolutely gorgeous. And I also did some work on some klipsch KLF speakers, which are larger tower speakers. So I've kind of worked with a medium set, a large set, and now I'm going to work with a smaller set of speakers. I have some materials laid out that I'm going to walk you through that I think you might need to gather or have prepared to complete this project. And by the way, I don't have a nifty camera to put on my head or to put on my body while I'm working. So I'm actually going to be doing these sort of intermittent updates as far as progress. Okay, and then I'm going to stitch all the videos together for you guys. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up some Bondo. Okay, and there you can see the material that I was using previously on the other speakers. It worked out just fine, so it's just standard Bondo, and then you need the catalyst, the hardener, along with it. And actually, if you look over here, you can see the previous evidence. I knew I needed something that I didn't care about to do all the mixing and all the work on, so believe it or not, this is actually my previous workstation that's transportable that I brought into this circumstance again. There's my little mixing tool. So the Bondo is going to be used to clean up or sharpen some of these corners, okay? And what I found last time was that it's better to put a little bit too much on, and then you can sand it down to those exact corners that you need real lightly. So don't get too, any Bondo that you put on and it hardens, obviously you have to sand it away. But somehow I found in my last experiment with this process that if you put a little bit more on those corners, it just makes, instead of mixing it up 2 or 3 times, you may only have to mix it up once to kind of build up a corner. And it really depends on what kind of shape your speakers are in, okay? Putty knife to get those sharp corners and kind of smear things down, clean things up. Sanding block for some light sanding. A radial sander with 220 sandpaper. And what I'll probably do is the next steps, just to kind of map it out a little bit, is I will apply the Bondo. I'll mix up the Bondo first. Then I'm going to apply the Bondo to, I'll rotate the speakers and just kind of give attention to all the areas that I think need attention. I think when I was working on the larger speakers, I actually this Bondo stuff, it dries very, very quickly. One thing that I found to be useful is that you can sort of review the speaker's condition before you mix the Bondo and mark some of those problematic areas with some tape before you get started, so you know exactly where you need to go, because you're going to have to move relatively quickly, again, because that Bondo only has so much time. And so the putty knife, kind of smearing things on, straightening everything out. And then I do an initial sand with this block, and I prefer the block so I can keep those corners nice and straight. Obviously you want the corners nice and straight when you're ready to put on the veneer, okay? Following that, I think it's a good idea to give the whole entire speaker a very light sand with a radial sander. There's mine kind of sitting in the bag there. It doesn't look all that fancy, but everything's in there, I promise, all the extra sandpaper and whatnot. Following that, I will start to cut out the pieces of the walnut veneer. And I purchased this on Amazon for like maybe 35 bucks. One of these is probably large enough to do a tower speaker. If you have some larger speakers, of course you need speakers, or a pair you need 2. So kind of keep that in mind. The brand is Edge Supply, okay? And so I think they have a few different varieties of wood that you can choose. I want it to be walnut because the previous Klipsch speakers and HPM Pioneer speakers that I did, they're also walnut, and I just kind of want everything to sort of match a little bit. And so I'll get to those steps, but I'm just kind of, again, kind of mapping out the trajectory for you guys as far as where I'm going and what kind of supplies I might need. After you get the corners all kind of fixed up and prepared to accept the veneer, of course you're going to have to do some measurements and make some cutouts. And it's a good idea to think about the grain and how the grain might wrap around the speaker consistently. And so it kind of depends on the orientation. Actually, these speakers, these KLH speakers, were built to sit vertically, but because I'm going to be using them for theater surround sound, I might actually think about that orientation actually wrapping around here, and then this would be the top, and then where it's sitting right now, of course, would be the right hand side. So I'm going to change things a little bit because of my intended use for these speakers. But again, make sure that grain is kind of wrapping around in a consistent way with whatever whatever sides of the speaker will end up being visible to the user. So when I have all those pieces sort of arranged and cut out, and I have a good plan in front of me, the next step would be to start applying this contact cement. And essentially, it's a slow-going process. And usually, what I do is I'll have both speakers kind of set up side by side, and then I'll just kind of rotate them consistently, dependent on how those pieces are going to come together on the faces. So doing 2 sides at a time, in my mind, is recommended. You can't do all of them because you have to set it up, apply the pieces. The other tool that's actually not visible here is, last time I was using a rolling pin that my wife uses to do a little bit of cooking, and I use too. I shouldn't say my wife, that we use to cook in our kitchen. And you use that tool to kind of iron out any of the bubbles. Okay, so when you're laying down this veneer on this side, for example, you want to start in these 2 corners and then just kind of let it sit down very carefully, or roll down very carefully until it fills the plane. And don't worry if you have a little bit of extra on the side, because you can actually go in later with an X-Acto blade and essentially trim things up really easily. So I think it's better to have a little extra, just a hair extra, than not enough. Okay? So the contact cement is actually applied on the back side of the veneer. And by the way, there's a little piece of kind of removable paper here, and there is an adhesive on this veneer, but in my mind it's not enough. And so what I usually do is I have a scrap piece of museum mat board, and I have it laid out, and essentially what I'm doing is I'm using this contact cement almost like I'm rolling paint, except I'm rolling it on the back side of the veneer to apply, and I'm also rolling it on the actual surface where the veneer is going to be going. Okay? And so that double-sided contact cement creates an extremely firm bond. And by the way, after you get it on there, if you think that you're going to try to remove it or sort of shift it a little bit because you realize it's not going to catch all the 2 corners on the far end very well, you're going to have an extremely hard time doing that. This contact cement stuff, it's very, very serious business. And it also has, the Bondo and the contact cement, there are some fumes involved. And so right now I'm actually inside, but I do plan on taking this operation outside so that I don't get sick. Okay? I think that about covers it, except after you get all the sides, of course, placed and everything's looking good and you've kind of trimmed things up with an X-Acto blade, the next step would be to take your radial sander and sand extraordinarily lightly to kind of just clean things up. You don't want to sand too much. In fact, I sanded too much on a pair of Cornwalls that I have, and I accidentally went a little bit too deep on the veneer. It's not the end of the world, but it taught me a lesson, okay? So it doesn't really take much to go through this very, very thin veneer. My advice is to use the lightest sandpaper that you possibly can. I think there's 220 in my bag, but you could go even higher, in my opinion, like 500 or 600, because you're just trying to lightly kind of clean up that veneer and maybe even remove some of the excess contact cement because it does get a little bit messy. I think the key to this process is really having a step-by-step controlled environment and process moving forward. So don't try to rush any of this, okay? In fact, for example, if I were going to start inside here, I might start with the tops of these speakers and I would do them both during the first pass. But then I would want to roll these out, get rid of the air bubbles, make sure that everything is good. But I still have my wet roller here that's full of contact cement. And so you need to have some spare bags nearby so that you can put that roller away and keep it, prevent it from drying up, okay? I did get a couple extras just in case, all right? So after you've sanded with your 220 or 500 or 600, whatever you decide to do, obviously you want to give it a beautiful finish. And this walnut looks almost sort of muted right now. But once you apply this tongue oil finish, and I've used this exact same product twice successfully on a pair of Klipsch KLF speakers and Pioneer HPM 60s. In my mind, I mean, they just looked absolutely stunning. So this has worked for me, this process. The way that I built up the tongue oil finish, I think I did it over a week's period of time, in fact. And so I set these up, these two not these two speakers, but the other speakers sitting on their back in my garage, because this tongue oil, of course, has a real intense smell and danger as well. I set it up in my garage, and I would simply just wet a paper towel. I'd put on some plastic gloves, of course. I'd apply some of the tongue oil to a paper towel, and I would literally just kind of follow the speaker, you know, and hit on all sides once daily for 7 or 8 days on both speakers, of course. So there was a methodical process with the application. After 7 or 8 days, I mean, I couldn't believe the sheen that was really just building up beautifully, and it worked. The other thing to consider is that while you're sanding, you don't want any of that dust getting on any of your sensitive speakers or anything of that nature. And so what I will do, in fact, that's one of the first things that I'm going to do, is I'm going to cut some plastic, and then I am going to adhere that plastic to the edge inside of the speaker. So all of this will be protected by plastic while I'm doing this entire process. I don't want any tongue oil or contact cement or anything getting on any of the important parts of the speaker. I'm only working on the exterior cosmetic condition. And that's enough for now. Like I said, I am going to be doing intermittent updates. And really, you know, I'm making this video because I wish that someone else had made this video for me. And obviously this process can work on any speaker that you think needs some TLC or attention. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye. Hey folks, phase 2 update video. I just kind of wanted to take you on a video tour of some of these corners. I tried to fill in some of these scratches on the top as well. It may look a little rough, but after I run over this with some sandpaper, it'll be well enough. Again, the big moment that I was concerned about was this area where there was a lot of, I guess, veneer, or the previous veneer that had flaked off or is now missing. And so I went ahead and just kind of filled that in as best as I could, so that when I apply that veneer on the lip here, it won't be noticeable. I need a flat surface, essentially, to put things on. Another detail of me just kind of clumping on material, and I'll go in there with some sandpaper on a block and try to straighten everything out. And I did that on a lot of the corners. Even some of the corners that looked all right to me, I added a little more just to kind of sharpen them up a hair. Down here there was an issue kind of on the inside of the lip, so that might be a little bit more challenging. And this sort of thing you don't have to worry about. It'll just kind of practically fall off. So believe me, the Bondo that you want to stay will stay in those crevices and where you want it. So I'm just going to let this dry for a bit, and then I'll attack this with the sandpaper. Hey folks, I'm in the middle of sanding these speakers down a little bit. I'm doing an overall sand over. You can kind of see how these corners are becoming a little bit more sharp, but one thing I noticed, this one in particular has an issue. You can kind of see there's a little bit of the previous veneer has some play, and so what I'm going to do is just apply a little bit of wood glue, and that'll solve that problem. I need these areas to be securely down before I put the new veneer on. So this looks like a slight problem that I can solve very, very easily. So this is a short video, but just kind of wanted to bring this to your attention. That's a circumstance that might come up with an old veneer, and you can kind of see the play. Okay guys, follow-up video showing essentially post-process of sanding. So using a radial sander with a very light grit. I'm really trying to not take off much at all, and I'm also trying to kind of smooth out generally what's going on, but obviously removing a lot of the clunky, you can kind of see here, you know, if I'm feeling it with my finger, that's smooth right there. I'm gonna have to go in with another block piece of a block of wood with some sandpaper on it to get this inside edge, but there's really not too much stuff up there anyway. That should be really, really easy. But yeah, just giving you a general overview of the post-sanding result, and also how valuable you know, covering the speakers or the drivers has been to protect them. I know they're old and I know they need a little bit of work, but there's no reason to make things worse, right? And so it doesn't have to be exact. You can kind of tell even the way that I'm using painter's tape to kind of mask things off. It's not a perfect system, but I'm catching, I'd say 95–98% of the particles that would bug me later. Yeah, all the corners I think are looking well enough. The general rule is that you want things kind of flat, because whatever isn't perfectly flat, the veneer, even when it's covering this up, it might pick up in a subtle way. But look at, if I kind of like rotate around this, you can see that I kind of built out that corner a little bit to give the veneer something to sit on. I'm building out the structure essentially. Again, you know, just I didn't put much on there, but it helped, right? There's another corner right here. That looked a little funny here for a second. Yeah, so it looks good. The next step that I would take with this, because before I put the veneer in, obviously I need a clean surface. And the next thing that I will do, or that I plan on doing, is I'm going to get some pure alcohol, and I'm going to put it on a rag while wearing some gloves, and I'm essentially just going to wipe the speaker cabinets down so that I can remove all the excess stuff. That we want to remove all that gunk before we move on to the next step, because we need a real nice clean surface for the veneer to sit on. So, you know, getting there. It's really, this process doesn't take long. I started this, I don't know, a couple hours ago, and the truth is I've been lollygagging a bit. It does not take long. Here's that wood glue that I did use to just kind of repair that one corner where the old veneer was popping up a little bit. That was a real simple solution, but gives me peace of mind moving forward. And again, these are my KLH Model 24s that I'm trying to bring back to life. Although they sounded great earlier, but I just kind of want them to look a little better. I want them to look real, I want them to have a clean surface, but I still love that mid-century modern look. So I'm going to stay with walnut. Anyway, stay posted for the next video. Thank you. Quick update on the application of mineral spirits. And I just have this large jug of mineral spirits. I have an old rag or t-shirt that I'm simply just putting some mineral spirits on and gently wiping down. The thing you want to remember is sometimes there might be something just sort of barely coming up, or these are old speakers, so you have to be a little bit cautious. You never know what your rag might accidentally grab and pull up. And so this is a process that I would proceed with carefully. But you can see, just a little bit of mineral spirits pulls off a lot of that dust so that you can move on to the next step confidently. Hey, good morning, guys. Day 2 of my speaker restoration project for the KLH 24 Model 24s. Kind of see the progress here in some of the morning light. Bondo's real nice and firm, and so everything is sanded down, pretty much ready to accept the treatment. I also yesterday swabbed down. After doing some sanding, I had to swab down the sides of the speaker cabinets with mineral spirits on an old rag t-shirt that I'd cut up. I went ahead and I hung that as well to dry out so it doesn't cause any danger to anyone. Pretty much I'm at a stage today where I need to start doing some thinking and planning so that I can maximize this one sheet of oak veneer, which you can kind of see right here. I have the speakers sitting on it right now because this stuff does come rolled up. And so the smart thing to do would be to maybe leave it out overnight and let it relax. But this morning I'm actually using the speakers themselves as weights to hold them down. Again, I want to maximize this material, and I took some measurements here for the top and the side, and obviously everything is multiplied by 2 and then by 2 again because I have 2 speakers. So I need to get all of these pieces out of this one sheet. This width right here is 7.5 inches. 24 is the width of the veneer, so 24 divided by 3 is 8, so 8 inches is going to give me 3 strips. Okay, those 3 strips I believe are plenty to create all of these pieces that I need to complete the job. By the way, it's nice to have a little extra. I'm cutting it a little bit close with 8, because the actual width of the speaker is 7.5. So that means I'm going to have a 1/4 of an inch on each side of the speaker as far as give. Because what I'm going to do at some point is I'm going to apply the veneer, and then I'm going to use an X-Acto blade and trim it up. Okay, so you want that little extra. You don't want to think that you're going to be able to place these sheets exactly how they need to fit onto the speakers. It's just not going to work. You need a little extra room, and the truth is, if you can afford more than 1/4 of an inch, it's probably a good thing. I also have a long ruler so that I can get a real nice straight, clean cut. And then I'm also going to be using brand new X-Acto blade, not a utility knife blade. I would get a more kind of detailed X-Acto blade, something a little smaller, and make sure it's a brand new sharp blade. I went to architecture school, and one thing you learn in architecture school is you don't try to cut in one pass. It's better to keep your X-Acto blade straight up in the air, so perpendicular, and make multiple passes to cut through the material. And again, my goal is to have 3 ribbons to extract these pieces from. Okay, I'll give you an update here pretty soon. Okay guys, update on the cutting process. As you can see, on the left hand side, I have 2 side sheets that have been extracted from the larger 24 by 48 inch sheet, and 2 top sheets. So 2 sides, 2 tops, and again 2 sides, 2 tops. So I've got all my materials ready. The tricky part is that if you're really concerned with the grain kind of following the corner of the speaker, be mindful of which ones you're using and how they're oriented. Frankly, I'm a little less concerned with that. But it is kind of nice sometimes to see that detail on a speaker, so just kind of a heads up on that. When I was cutting, these are the tools, obviously using a graphite pencil just to make a real subtle mark, and then an X-Acto blade with a new blade. You can also use masking tape to make your marks if you're uncomfortable putting graphite on the veneer. But the real truth is that the graphite's not going to be an issue, because you are going to lightly sand these, very, very lightly, because as you can see, this material is extraordinarily thin, so you can hardly sand it all on these things. You just got to kind of move over and practically just kind of touch them and then walk away. If you end up over sanding, you're gonna start to remove some of that valuable oak veneer. So yeah, I mean, I'm getting to the point where I'm ready to start using that contact cement, that contact solution. I forget the detail of the brand that I bought, but I'll show it to you when I get there. Okay guys, so I just completed the first stage of applying the veneer to my speakers. I wanted to show you sort of my, by the way, here's the contact cement that I'm using. Obviously when I'm not using it, I put the lid back on so it doesn't dry. And furthermore, I have just a simple throwaway plastic bag that I'm putting my small roller in when I'm not applying anything. That being said, you need some sort of a surface that is almost kind of throwaway. You can see the evidence of my work on a previous set of speakers here. And you know, that veneer rolls up, and you need to be careful not to get the contact cement on the side that will be exposed, of course. But it's a little bit of a pickle, because that contact cement, or excuse me, that veneer, has a tendency to want to curl. And so actually, you know, the real smart thing to do, which I didn't do, would be to cut your material and then maybe try to flatten it for an evening. You know, put something heavy on top of all those pieces to try to flatten them so that they don't curl up. I did not do that. This is a small set of speakers, so it's not the end of the world. Anyway, I also wanted to talk to you about the order of operations. You obviously don't want to start with the lip. That's the last thing that you want to do, because you want that lip to actually cover up this exposed veneer edge cosmetically. And so, in my opinion, the best way to do this is to maybe start with the smaller pieces. Okay, so I'm going to do the tops, which I've already done. They're secure. I couldn't find my rolling pin, so I just used a water bottle, a real nice rounded SIG water bottle, because what you want to do, you want to apply these things very carefully, slowly, and almost kind of roll the veneer on, and then following that, you want to roll out any air bubbles with this sort of thing. Okay? So I think this turned out pretty good for me not doing this for it's been at least a year. But if you do it once, it's kind of like second nature. It's like riding a bike. And of course, I think the more that you do it, the better you get at it. So I'm kind of excited to see the end result of these speakers. I also want you to notice that there's quite a bit of excess over here, and that's not the end of the world, because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip these speakers over, and then I'm going to use the X-Acto blade and trim them up. Okay, real nice. And I'm going to use a sharp blade too, because this veneer, it dulls the blades really quickly. So anyway, I'm going to start with my tops, then I'm going to go to the sides, and then lastly I'm going to work on the lip of the speaker. And the order of that is useful for the cosmetic appearance of the speaker, because you don't want this edge exposed to the user, because obviously the user is going to be looking at the speaker from this perspective. So yeah, stage one went smoothly. See you on the other side. Folks, just a real fast update. I wanted to show you all with the speaker flipped over in preparation for just kind of trimming off that excess that's on the speaker. Okay. Another brief update, guys, which I think this is important information. I've trimmed up these sides, but you're only going to get it exact so far, and I would advise that you use the detailed trimming to some sandpaper, some very light sandpaper, or a sanding block, which is what I have here. And so one thing I've learned is that if you're kind of doing this sort of motion with this veneer, you're apt to possibly pull up some of this beautiful grain and create some imperfections. And so, just be mindful of that. But the goal, when you put on this side piece, is that you're going to want to cover, again, you're going to want to cover that little lip up, the exposed veneer lip, okay? You're going to want to cover that up, but you still need that flat surface for the veneer to fall on. And so that's what I'm trying to do right now, is I'm just trying to prep that lip so everything's perfectly flat and ready to go. All right? Quick update, guys. I've gone ahead and done some sanding on all 4 edges on both sides, on both speakers, and so of course that created some new dust. And what I'm going to be doing is applying some mineral spirits on the speakers again to remove any materials that might cause issues with the final sides of the veneer being applied. And so again, just with an old t-shirt, cut it up, douse it with some mineral spirits, wear a glove, and then wipe things off. So we're getting close to the end. Hey guys, so I have all sides on both speakers applied, trimmed, and sanded. You can still see there's a lot of just sanding dust on the side here. I'm a little less worried about that now, because I'm going to be doing some curation and cleaning up after I apply the top sort of lip veneer, and that is the last thing that is really remaining. And so I did have to sand again though, because I wanted this edge to be pretty darn flush and clean. I have to say I did make a mistake, and this is something that you guys can learn from me from. You can see that I didn't quite, I had plenty of room on this side where I trimmed it, but I ran out of room here. And thank God this is the bottom of the speaker, so I think it'll be less noticeable. And I think even just that little bit, I could continue sanding down, but I'm going to depend on the flexibility of the veneer to sort of cover that up, essentially. Okay. I can't remember that saying as far as woodworking, but a lot of woodworking is just sort of covering up mistakes, and that happened to be one of them. But you guys can learn from my mistake, so make sure you have plenty of lip on all sides when you're applying those pieces that you've cut out. One of them ended up being just a little bit too, it wasn't short, I just was a little bit careless when I was putting it on this end, and I left too much on this side. So just be cautious. The next step, and by the way, the last thing that I did was I applied mineral spirits here on the top lip to clean it off, because I am anticipating applying that veneer. The next thing that I'm going to be working on is I'm going to cut down, I'm going to measure this out approximately, and then I'm going to cut down some slats or some strips that I can then lay on top and prepare. And so that'll be coming up next. Hey guys, quick update on progress. I am currently in the process of measuring and installing these edge pieces that sit on the lip. This is a little bit more tedious with some approximate measurements, and I'm also applying the contact cement with a brush, sparingly. Conservatively. So I'm covering the entire surface of the speaker and the veneer that's being applied, but I'm certainly not being liberal with that application. Essentially what I'm doing is I cut one side, and you can also, by the way, guys, see I cut myself. The X-Acto blade hopped up off the ruler, and so be careful, please. I want to make sure to get these exact 45-degree angles, and the way that I accomplish that is simply with a ruler. So I lay my pieces down with a straight edge, and then I use this line. This is actually a quilting ruler. I think I got this in a discount bin for like 99 cents, but it has these convenient lines to follow so that you can make sure you get a very precise 45-degree angle. That seems to have been working for me. But again, when you're applying these things, be cautious. I've already applied 2 long sides on the other speaker, and that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do 2 long sides, and then I'm going to do the 2 shorter ends on both speakers. But again, using a paintbrush to apply the contact cement, using a sharp blade, and then also I'm using this cutting mat that has these angles already mapped out for me. As long as you cut your strips with a straight edge, then you're going to be able to get that 45-degree angle. Okay guys, so I think I've pretty much got all the veneer on, including on those last edges or lips. So I just kind of wanted to give you guys a quick sort of tour, let you know how things are going. I just did another pass of sanding, mostly for the benefit to kind of smooth out these edges right there. And by the way, you can see that the drivers need some work too. So yeah, I think things turned out pretty nice. I mean, these are always real difficult areas, and it really kind of depends on your level of OCD. The better you are at measuring, the more precise you are, obviously, the better this stuff is going to turn out. But usually what I do is I actually I take just a little bit of wood glue, and you just put a little bit, if these guys don't meet up perfectly, just put a little bit of that wood glue on top and then give it a quick sand, and the color of that walnut wood will mix with the glue and kind of settle in there a little bit and fill in a hair. But compared to how these were looking previously, these are coming out real nicely. And for anyone who's seen KLH speakers with the grills off, they never look too pretty. And of course these need some work too. So and again, I'm gonna have my speaker guy manage that, because that's his expertise. And again, you know, this is really where I was lending that sanding detail here on those corners. Another area that can be a little bit tricky is on the inside edge, right here. And so I did kind of very gently take my rotary sander and go in there. You got to be really careful not to go too far, otherwise you'll end up kind of wearing into this corner and things won't look quite as tight. But I am not going to be putting veneer on the inside here. I think what I'm going to opt to do is I'm going to get some black acrylic paint, and I'm just going to essentially, you know, the grills cover up a lot of this anyway, but whatever is not covered, I think just some black acrylic paint will be just fine. I think trying to go in there with veneer is going to be overkill. Additionally, if you do that, you're going to change the dimensions and your grill might not pop in there as easily. And so for a couple of reasons, I'm not going to be covering that. But that's a personal preference. So yeah, I think these turned out real nice. The next step is I'm going to clean them up with some mineral spirits. And by the way, right now the oak looks a little bit dull, you know, almost kind of muted. In all honesty, it practically looks sort of a brownish gray. But once you clean all the dust off with some mineral spirits, and then you start oiling them up, the walnut's really going to just sing, essentially. It's going to look beautiful. I'm going to do essentially another video or videos of me applying my preferred finish, and so that's what's going to be coming up next. But I'm pretty much done with the veneer. I'm happy with it. Good morning, folks. This is Matthew. I'm giving you guys an update on my speaker project with these KLH 24s. And I have some nice morning light coming in, and the light is kind of showing. When you're applying these layers of finish that I was going through earlier, and you're doing it basically once every 24 hours. Essentially, you need a little bit of time for that varnish or that oil to cure a bit. And as you can see, I haven't sanded or really touched up. This is basically as is, and I think this is after 4 coats. I actually have a pair of speakers over here, and you can kind of see the finished look where I really just kept going and kept going. These are my HPM 60s that I essentially applied the same process to. But you can see how beautifully they came out. And I think that happened. These are a little more glossy, essentially because I applied more coats. So you can continue just applying more and more and more of that finish to get the result that you want. I think with these, I'm actually kind of okay with where they are. They turned out beautiful, you know, even like these corners, it's a little bit difficult to see in this light, but look at how beautiful you know, you got to be being really careful getting these guys snug. But as you can see, that it's still, there are these little like kind of tacky things kind of hanging on to the varnish. There's one right there. And I have that morning light kind of really coming in and shining in on these for you guys. So I'm just going to sort of rotate the speaker a little bit so you can kind of see the state of things. And this is before doing any kind of final buffing to these guys. And I'm only showing you one. The other one pretty much looks identical. And by the way, you know, going through a methodical process with this sort of thing is the way to go. For example, you know, work on them both at the same time. If you apply a coat of varnish or tongue oil, make sure you do it to both speakers at the same time, okay? And by the way, while I was applying that tongue oil, I was wearing gloves. That stuff does have a tendency to drip, so you need to put down a drop cloth. you're not going to want to move them for several days, maybe even a week. So you really have to kind of set up a good workstation where they're going to be static and stationary for a while. But yeah, these turned out beautiful. Right now, I put the original grills back on. I was thinking about actually restretching some new grills, but the original grill cloth just looks so beautiful. There were no issues with it. And there's the badge down there. I'm not going to do anything. So, and you guys can see that things turned out pretty nice, but there is one final step with some buffing that needs to occur. And essentially what I do is, and by the way, you should probably do this. You can do this as you're applying those coats of tung oil. And these are 3M buffing pads. And so the one on the left is a thin gray 3M buffing pad, and it's a little bit more coarse. It's not going to scratch the varnish. It's not going to do anything, but it's going to take up those little guys, those little, like, you know, just little pieces like that are just kind of sitting there and hanging on. You know, like this one right there, I can kind of feel it. This gray pad is going to be used to kind of bring that business up or remove those little minor imperfections, okay? And I got some bright light shining on it, so I'm going to try to... That morning light is good, but it kind of changes the color of that gray pad. I wanted to make sure you guys see it really well. This is one that I've used before on some speakers, okay? And I still had it around. It's still functional to me. It'll still do the job. And so I'm just going to really lightly kind of give these guys a once-over with that gray, more coarse kind of buffing pad. And that's going to bring up some of those imperfections I was talking to you about. Now this one is a white, and the brand is 3M, okay? 3M. And I think I don't have the packaging that went with these anymore, but I think if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, you'll see something that looks quite similar. In fact, I think I bought a package. It was a package deal, and these things all came together. This one is a little bit unique because it kind of has almost sort of a softer side on one end, and then on the opposite end, it's a little bit more firm. And so I'm going to start with this gray, then I'm going to go to the firm, and then I'm going to finish with this softer side. Okay? And then, of course, if you can find just a buffing cloth, to really, when all is said and done, that'll help as well. Again, this isn't my first rodeo. Let's see, I showed you guys my HPM 60s, and forgive the mess. These guys aren't even plugged in right now. If you guys are speaker collectors, you understand. You end up just acquiring these things. But these things, a relative of mine had a tenant who left these behind. And they were in pretty bad shape, but they had the original drivers. So these are some examples of some speakers that I restored. And the last thing that I did, of course, was the process that I'm showing you today. And look how beautiful and glossy that is. That's the exact same process that I've been walking you through. The only difference is that I think I was a little bit more assertive with putting more coats of that tung oil on. And maybe it was, instead of 3 or 4 coats, which is what I put on those KLH 24s, I think I may have done this 6 or 7 times. And so that produced a higher sheen or gloss. But you can look. I'm really proud of the way these turned out. And the corners look gorgeous. Everything is nice. I also have some KLF 20s over here, and I did the same process with. Now, when I was telling you guys, you got to be really careful about over sanding. I actually did over sand just a little bit right here. You can kind of see. It's not going to be a big deal because when I put those grills on, it'll cover that up. But that was really a bummer when that started to happen. When you're using a rotary sander, that veneer disappears really, really quickly. But again, there's that beautiful gloss. It's the same exact process that I've walked you guys through. Now I think what I'm going to do, because I don't have a way to hold my phone and perform this work, is I'll stop this video session, and then I'll go ahead and buff these guys up, and then I'll show you a final product. Thank you. Hey you guys, so I went through a 3-tiered process where I used those 3M pads to just really kind of curate a little bit. I started with that gray, more coarse pad that was thin, and I followed up with the white pad, which has 2 sides. One is slightly more coarse and the other one is soft. But the white pad is basically for, you start with the gray, then you start with the slightly more coarse white pad, and then you finish with the very soft side of that same white pad. And as you can see, like previously there were like these little guys that I had to sort of knock off the wood. There were quite a few of them. They're all gone now. And that was really done with that gray pad, okay? You can do this several times, several stages. At this point, it's really a matter of preference, how far you want to take this. And there's one of those sanding imperfections that I told you guys about. So that was, again, it's just, it's the only blemish on these speakers following my process. And it's a little disappointing, but for the most part, it makes me really happy to refurbish these guys and bring them back to life. I'm going to be using these for my surround sound system. They're relatively small speakers, but I like the look of them, and they still sound okay. And the grills look fantastic. The last thing I would do is, and I'm not going to do that today, is on the inner edge, I'm actually going to take some quality acrylic paint, and I think that I'm going to paint that inside edge black. Because as I stated before, these grills just barely get in there, okay? And so if I had added, a 1/32 width of veneer on each side, I don't think those guys would have gotten in there very well, okay? It would have been a little bit too tight. So again, you can kind of see the result of knocking off those just little particulates, and then taking that white pad, both sides methodically, including the edge or the lip, and just curating. That's the best way I would describe what I just did. My other speakers did end up being a little bit more glossy. And the truth is, if I really wanted to, and I am considering this, I'm considering doing one more coat of tung oil, just to give it a little bit more gloss. I think that would really add like a real nice kind of finishing touch to these guys. So possibly one more coat of tung oil. But otherwise, I'm really satisfied with the way that they turned out, with exception to this unfortunate moment right there. And please, everyone, just kind of learn from me and my mistakes. That veneer gets sanded away extraordinarily quickly. I hope this video was helpful for everyone. When I was working on my speakers, I really wish that there had been a video like this out there to kind of help me and walk me through the steps, and also show me the quality of the results. And I have had a little bit of experience woodworking. I'm a visual artist with an architecture background, so I have a lot of attention to detail. And I think that's the most important thing, measurements, and moving slowly and methodically. Don't try to rush this in 2 or 3 days. The first time that you do this, give yourself 2 weeks and set yourself up a real nice spot in the garage to apply the tung oil multiple times, for example. So that being said, thank you everyone for your attention. Bye-bye.